Hello, and welcome to the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation's event for World IP Day. My name is Morgan Stevens, and I'm a research assistant here at ITIF, a think tank focused on the intersection of technology and public policy. Today, we're here to celebrate World IP Day, and in following with this year's theme of Women and IP, Accelerating Innovation and Creativity, discuss how IP enables women innovators and creators to work for a better future. To get started, let's hear about the history and background of World IP Day from IP educator Jackie McDowell.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us to celebrate the 23rd Annual World Intellectual Property Day. I'm Jackie McDowell, founder of the IP Educator blog, creator, and Senior Director for Copyright and Creativity with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Innovation Policy Center. The GIPC is proud to partner with the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation to present this webinar, IP Stories, Women and IP, World IP Day event. Through brands, media, entertainment, sports, technology, healthcare, recipes, and much more, IP rights, such as patents, trademark, and copyright, impact our lives every day. So, to raise awareness and celebrate the global societal contributions made by creators and innovators, WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, instituted the first World IP Day on April 26, 2000. This date was chosen because WIPO entered into force on April 26 in 1970. For 23 years, the global IP community has unified its message on this day, celebrating the role of IP in creativity and innovation, and highlighting the stories of our global creators and innovators who positively impact our lives and build toward a better future. This year's theme is Women and IP, Accelerating Innovation and Creativity. Our all-female panel is set for a lively and educational discussion. I am so thrilled to hear the first-hand stories of how IP impacts these ladies' entrepreneurial endeavors, and I'd like to take a moment to thank the policymakers who support the IP that allows these women and others like them to help make the world a better place. Again, thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this webinar.
Thanks, Jackie. We're also very fortunate to have Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee provide remarks on the importance of IP.
I'm U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn, and what a pleasure it is for me to join you on World IP Day. You know, being a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Commerce Committee, I kind of have a front row seat to what is going on in your space and looking at how we best protect our nation's innovators, our scientists, our artists, our big thinkers that are trying to solve problems. Over the past few years, I've focused on crafting bills that address those challenges while still allowing innovators to innovate and to feel free to dream those big dreams and solve those big problems, come up with solutions. But far too often, policymakers forget what needs to happen next. Without strong IP protections, eventually that innovation will fade away and it will just never happen. We don't want you to be frustrated. We want you to be energized to innovate. As a Tennessean, I've taken a particular interest in protecting the IP rights of songwriters, musicians, artists. We also see people that are innovating in the aftermarket auto parts space. We see people that are innovating new eco-friendly engines in the auto engineering place. Everybody is a part of our broad, expansive, creative community. Now, when it comes to music, this year I've introduced again my American Music Fairness Act, which would ensure that music creators receive fair compensation when their songs are played on AM/FM radio. Once we pass this bipartisan, bicameral legislation, corporate radio broadcasters will be held to the very same standard as all other music streaming platforms. This bill is just one component of a great policy idea that started with a conversation. So I look forward to having these kind of conversations with you, hearing from you, and really pinpointing what we can do to preserve your ability to innovate. Keep up with me, blackburn.senate.gov, or find me on social media at Marsha Blackburn. I want to make certain I hear from you.
Thank you very much to Senator Blackburn for her remarks. Now to get started with our discussion, I am joined today by a wonderful group of panelists who are here to share their own stories on IP. So first, we have Kelly Anderson, Executive Director at the Global Innovation Policy Center at the Chamber of Commerce, Greta Meyer, co-founder and CEO of Sequel, and Miranda Mulholland, a musician and founder and artistic director at the Muskoka Music Festival. For everyone joining us today, this program is meant to be interactive, and your questions and comments are most welcome. So if you're watching online, you're invited to submit questions via Slido. If you're watching on ITIF's website, you can see the link at the bottom of the page to Slido where you can submit the questions. And if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you should see the link underneath the video description. We'll have a brief Q&A for those questions at the end. And that's all for our housekeeping today. So first and foremost, I'd like to pass it off to Kelly Anderson to begin with sharing her story.
Thanks so much, Morgan. And thank you to the whole ITIF team for inviting me to be here today. Happy World IP Day. As Morgan mentioned, my name is Kelly Anderson, and I work at the Chamber's Global Innovation Policy Center. The GIPC is the division within the Chamber that promotes the ways that intellectual property advances innovation and creativity, spurs economic growth, and drives global competitiveness. But what I wanted to start out today with is telling you a little bit about myself in an effort maybe to be a little more interesting than your inbox or any other distractions you may have going on. So I'm currently the Executive Director of International Policy at GIPC, where I lead our advocacy in global markets. I also have 2 autoimmune diseases, and I have spent the last 9 summers helping to run a camp for children with cancer. So my goal here over the next 5 to 7 minutes is to tell you how intellectual property supports each of these facts. So let's start with me. I'm a middle child and I like talking about myself. So 11 years ago, I was diagnosed with a condition called alopecia. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it's an autoimmune disease that causes hair loss. So in my case, all of my hair fell out in a little over 2 weeks. It's an experience that I would wish on absolutely no one. I would say, think of the person you dislike the most in the world and know that I would not wish it on them. In the weeks and months that followed, I must have seen a dozen different specialists and doctors, and they all had a similar answer. Because your disease advanced so quickly, there's nothing that we can do. I know some of you have probably experienced a moment similar to this or know someone that has, and it's absolutely devastating. But as with all changes in life, we adapt, we learn to deal. So I brought some great wigs and I learned to live with my new life sans hair. Then about 3 years ago, my doctor learned that there were a series of medicines called JAK inhibitors that are typically used for things like rheumatoid arthritis. But they had also been shown to promote almost total hair regrowth. And when we didn't really have any other options, my doctor and I figured, why not add it to the regimen of things that I was taking? And the thing that was really shocking was it worked. Over the last 2.5 years, I went from just having the beginning stubbles of little hairs to the luscious locks that you see me with today. And that's the power of medical innovation. So, what does effective IP protection do to help enable those medical discoveries? For businesses large and small, from unicorn startups to Fortune 100 companies, IP provides legal certainty to make high-risk, high-capital investments that will be protected in markets all around the world. I think we're really living in an era of unprecedented technological progress. Innovations in healthcare, manufacturing, and technology are improving productivity and lengthening our quality of lives in ways that were never before possible. But these advancements in innovation are not inevitable. The innovative community relies on a robust legal and regulatory framework to sustain their investment into the next generation of innovation of medicines and technologies. That is made possible through effective IP protection. So often, I think we see that innovation is incremental. If you look at my story, scientists tried and failed for years to identify effective treatments for alopecia that was extensive as the disease that I had. And it was because of IP protection that innovators could continue to try and try again to identify a medicine that worked. And on the backs of those failures, the innovative community delivered a solution for people like me. But I think if we are to sustain this progress, we can't forget how we got here. Throughout the pandemic, we saw how IP helped to build global capacity for innovation and deliver the fruits of that innovation to the innovative community in record time. Yet despite the critical role that IP played, multilateral institutions and governments around the world are trying to undermine the IP framework that enabled our response to the pandemic. Each year, some of you may know that the Chamber releases an international IP index. It benchmarks the IP environment in 55 global economies across 50 unique indicators. In this year's edition, after 10 years of progress, the index really shows that our efforts to improve global IP protection may be stagnating. We've seen this through things like the use of compulsory licenses during the global pandemic, the forthcoming revisions to the EU's pharmaceutical legislation, which was actually introduced this morning, Happy World IP Day, and the ongoing debate over the WTO TRIPS waiver. You know, we at GIPC really believe that for innovation to continue, be it for alopecia or the next generation of coronaviruses, it's contingent that governments create an enabling environment through strong IP laws. You know, we really think that it's in every country's best interest, developed and developing alike, to invest in stronger IP protection because of the array of economic benefits that it can provide. The index shows, in fact, that countries with the most robust IP systems in place are more likely to see a host of socioeconomic benefits than the economies whose IP regimes lag behind. You know, these benefits really run the gamut from greater clinical trial activity, more access to licensed creative content like movies and music, increased private sector investment in R&D, and greater availability of private equity and venture capital. So it really seems that no aspect of a country's economy is untouched by IP. I mentioned at the outset that I help run a pediatric oncology camp, which may seem like an unusual thing to mention in a professional setting like this. It's called Camp Sunrise. It's held in Annapolis, Maryland every year. You can look it up. And it is one of the things that I love most in the world. It is the thing that sets my heart on fire. And here's how it's relevant to what we're talking about today. Every year, we have campers that are participating in cutting-edge clinical trials. In fact, one of our former campers was one of the very first patients in the clinical trial for what ended up becoming the first FDA-approved immunotherapy for leukemia. That drug, it's called Kymriah, had an 83% remission rate within the first 3 months for patients that had previously run out of options. And when you talked to the innovative company that brought that medicine to market, the scientists would tell you that 83% is incredibly impressive, but they know it's not good enough. But it's a hell of a start. And that's what IP can do. It incentivizes companies to start. It helps you take what might seem like a crazy idea, like immunotherapy probably once did to many, and invest time, capital, and resources to turn it into one of the next life-saving medicines. So for me, as I see kids bounding off the bus each year that I didn't know if I would see the year before, when I put them on the bus the previous year, that's what this investment in innovation is all about. I really fundamentally believe that effective IP is enabling the investment into the medicines that keep these campers alive. And it's also happened to given me a pretty great head of hair. IP is not just enabling the discovery of new treatments for my campers or people with alopecia, but patients of all ages in all countries and markets all around the world. So in closing, when I was a kid, I used to complain about going to church every Sunday with my parents. And my mother used to tell me that I didn't need to pay attention to every single word, but rather I needed to have one nugget that I could take away and carry with me for the rest of the week. Just one. So I would say my nugget for you today is this. When countries take steps to improve their IP frameworks, the benefits are real. You see those benefits for patients, you see it in the economy, and you see it in a country's global competitiveness. and a continued investment in IP will be key to ensuring that innovation can continue to tackle the challenges and diseases of tomorrow. Thank you again to the ITIF team for inviting me to be here today, and I'm looking forward to our discussion on the panel.
Thank you so much for sharing more about your incredibly inspiring work. That was wonderful to learn about your experience with IP. So next we have Greta Meyer, the co-founder and CEO of Sequel.
Hi, thank you, Morgan. Thanks for having me, and happy World IP Day, everyone. For some context, I am the co-founder and CEO of Sequel. We are a women's health company focused on solving the needs of women with product innovation and addressing unmet needs. So our first product, which is a redesign of the tampon, is designed to be more fluid mechanically efficient, more comfortable, and safer. My background's in product development and product management, and I've worked in a lot of different spaces and didn't exactly intend to end up in the women's health space or designing tampons for that matter, but truly IP and having an idea and then protecting it has led me here. So I studied engineering and product design at Stanford University, and I co-founded Sequel starting out of a class project with my co-founder, Amanda. So Stanford is a great place to have an idea and seek advice. And once we thought we had a novel idea, we've started getting advice immediately. And truly, it was out of a class project that we presented our final presentation, and a panelist, a judge at the time, said, I'm interested in being an investor in this. If you guys go and get a patent, protect this, make sure it's not just going to be taken by anyone, and come back to me. And so we did a lot more R&D to prove out the need and the product and also the defensibility first. But the long story short is that we did 9 months later return to the same investor and say, here's our IP, here's some traction, here's some other technical proof points. And he was actually our first angel investor. So that's why IP is near and dear to me. For some context, our tampon is a geometric difference. So right now, the insight that we found was that tampons are, although they are almost ubiquitous, the vast majority of US women prefer the tampon. They are also a large source of stress. And so that was really the insight that we focused on first, is just 70% of women use it, but 70% of those women also use some sort of a backup method. So a pad, a liner, or any sort of combination there. So that was the insight to us. This product really isn't working. And we started looking at the fluid mechanical efficiency. So why are these products failing before they were fully saturated? And we found something called bypass leakage, or what we like to call colloquially to users, the red line effect. So when a tampon is not fully saturated, but it is leaking before it's full. And so what we have designed is a shape that essentially is designed to prevent that premature leakage. So redirects the fluid to a longer flow path, thereby encouraging the fluid to absorb more evenly in stages, reducing dry spots and reducing leakage. So back to the IP part, is that the space of tampons is riddled with what consumers might perceive as innovation, right? There's always a new company, but when you look at the supply chain behind the scenes, they're all coming from the same private label suppliers. So that was eye-opening to us, that if we don't protect ourselves, it's going to be our tampon that's just kind of copied in all of these boxes, because innovation is so expensive in this space because of manufacturing hurdles and also because of regulatory hurdles. So we knew that whatever we discovered or invented, we would need to make sure to back it up. And as well as that, we knew we had to protect ourselves early and do a prior art search before raising any money, just as a fiduciary duty. We couldn't in earnest raise money without truly knowing the landscape and knowing that we weren't going to be subjecting ourselves to infringing on other patents. And that meant also being aware of things like public disclosure. We were in school and we were just getting very well versed in the do's and do nots of holding patents. So Yeah, but IP has been very important for us as a company and our strategy going up against large companies globally, being protected as well as being eligible for investment. And so generally also we think about it as that IP is not only our patent portfolio, but also things like trademarks and copyrights. And IP is not only I've talked a little bit about being defensible, but it also opens doors for us in areas like licensing. So if a company wants to access our technology, that's an opportunity for us to have potentially a relationship with that company. But it's a very unique market to be in, and our company in general, I think that's where we really focus when we are talking to investors about the space. Is you see so many companies and very little innovation, and it is really because it's challenging to manufacture a product like this. But if we weren't able to defend ourselves and convince them that we have IP, a true a portfolio, I think it would be a much less attractive investment. So that's a little bit about the background of our company and why IP is important to us. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion with all the other panelists. So thank you, Morgan.
Absolutely, and thank you. It's great to see how IP is enabling innovation, especially in such an important industry. So next up, we have Miranda Mulholland, a musician and a very talented fiddle player.
Hi, thank you so much. What an honor to be here with these inspiring women. Greta, I was just thinking it's the launch of the new "Are You There, God Is Me, Margaret" movie, so it's perfect timing to talk about tampons and about period work. It's so great. Yes, my name is Miranda Mulholland, and I'm the Creative Culture Advisor at Music Canada, which is the trade organization representing the major labels here in Canada. And in my role, I draw from my ongoing career as an artist. I provide context and connections to bring a nuanced understanding of the music ecosystem to my organization. I'm a singer-songwriter and a fiddle player. I have my own independent record label called Roaring Girl Records, and I've spent the last 20 years as a touring musician, traveling and performing around the world. But that's minus a few years there where none of us went anywhere. The thematic takeaway for me in the pandemic, and the one that I want to continue to act on almost as a personal mission statement, is that if it was important before, it's imperative now. And that includes addressing systemic issues. You know, they were always important to me, but they're imperative. So I always knew I was a feminist. But now I feel like a radical feminist. And I've always been an advocate for fair remuneration to human creators for their intellectual property. But now I realize I have to be even louder and more persuasive, and to encourage others to be so as well. You know, artists are small businesses, and so we need favorable copyright and legislative framework, you know, in order to thrive like any other entrepreneur. I wanted to tell you a little story about another inspiring businesswoman on top of Kelly and Greta. I want to talk about Dolly Parton, because Dolly was approached by Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker. And Elvis wanted to record Dolly's song, "I Will Always Love You," which she wrote the same day as she wrote Jolene, which I would call a very good day. But the deal was that if Elvis sang her song, he would take 50% of her publishing. And so Dolly said no. She was quoted, I won't do a Dolly, but she was quoted and she said, "I wanted to hear Elvis sing it and it broke my heart. I cried all night, but I had to keep that copyright in my pocket. You have to take care of your business. These are my songs. They're like my children, and I expect them to support me when I'm old." So for me, I started my career in music in 1999. Just as the digital revolution started to change everything about how music was consumed and how artists were paid. You'll probably remember, but all the sectors were scrambling to adapt and to innovate and try and guess what direction this brave new world would take us. Now, my education in music had taught me how to sing, how to play the violin, how to read music, how to understand counterpoint and harmony, but I didn't have a lot of practical information about life as a professional musician in this new landscape. I didn't know where to register my songs. I didn't know where to submit the work that I'd contributed to for neighboring rights. I didn't know where to send my set lists, or even that you could for public performance remuneration. So I didn't understand what Dolly so beautifully said. But over the years, as my career progressed, I began to get quite evangelical about it as I negotiated my own rights as a recording artist solo, as a record label owner, as a session musician. I also dug into some systemic problems in the current framework and tried to educate other artists and advocate for change. Because artists need to be paid when their music is played, and complicated systems and this shift to a digital landscape, left many reeling. A lot of artists were confused or, afraid to speak up about the framework. I was on a panel at a music conference a few years ago, and the panel moderator kept referring to these quirks of copyright law. And to him, they were quirks, but to me and to my colleagues, the quirks were what was keeping us from being paid fairly. And the senator sort of referred to that off the top for US musicians and radio play. Now in Canada, we have a quirk that's called the $1.25 million radio royalty exemption. And this allows some of Canada's largest broadcasting conglomerates to not pay artists played on the radio. And when it was implemented 25 years ago, at the burgeoning time of all of this, it was intended to be temporary, but it's still around today. And so with the understanding that copyright's essential to the remuneration of creators, we have to understand too that the evolution of the framework is necessary to keep up with the times. And since this World Intellectual Property Day is highlighting women in IP, I want to mention that one thing that's evolving at a glacial pace is women as copyright holders. In 2018, female inventors were associated with just 13% of global patent applications. That means that at this current rate, gender parity in patents won't be achieved until 2070. Now, in my field, women are still wildly underrepresented in many aspects of this business, the business of music. In a recent study by USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative that looked at the Billboard Top 1,000 popular songs spanning a decade, women songwriters were only credited at 12.7%. So there are many systemic reasons for this, which initiatives here in Canada are trying to address, including Music Publishers Canada, Women in the Studio Accelerator, and SOCAN has her music awards. We have a long way to go, but promoting the value of IP on panels such as this and learning about the cross-sector coordinations and initiatives to amplify and educate women and underrepresented communities. This is essential, and it's so wonderful to hear these women's stories. And I think that we should also use this panel as a time to come together and share these stories, but also to pledge to find more creators to share the message with, that the stewardship of our intellectual property is crucial to our business. And just because of the week we've had in music last week, I would go one step further and say that it's also crucial to our humanity. I'm going to quote from the newly formed Human Artistry campaign, which was launched at South by Southwest and has now been embraced globally. Developments in artificial intelligence are exciting and could advance the world farther than we ever thought possible, but AI can never replace human expression and artistry. Creative works shape our identity, values, and worldview, and there are fundamental elements of our culture that are uniquely human. Only humans are capable of communicating the endless intricacies, nuances, and complications of the human condition through art, whether it be music, performance, writing, or any other form of creativity. Now, this campaign has outlined 7 core principles to responsibly use artificial intelligence to support human creativity and accomplishment. with respect to the immutable value of human artistry and expression. The support for this initiative spans across journalism, photography, voice actors, major global organizations representing songwriters, composers, musicians, and independent music. And again, a real cross coalition. And so I encourage you to take a look and sign the petition if you feel moved to human artistry. And so we're living in another fascinating time now for me, coming up in the digital age, another fascinating time of innovation. But I believe that what was important before is imperative now, and that intellectual property laws are essential to the fair remuneration of human creators as new things occur and are developed. There's a book that I've read called Ruling the Waves, and it's by Deborah Spar, and it was published in 2001. But I think it's more relevant than ever today. Dr. Spar, she turns to history and shows us that innovation always creates these waves of commerce and chaos, and then it's followed by monopoly, and then finally with implemented rules and regulations. And so this is like the printing press and the maps and the compass and the radio and television, like the Wild West of the internet, they all follow the same pattern. And there needs to be this nuanced understanding, I think, of the ramifications of these policies and the implementation of policies that take into account all of those affected. Or we get things like the radio royalty exemption, these holdovers. And my pet pony, I think, is that artists need to be at the table for perspective and as critical thinkers. Artists have always been at the forefront of every revolution, including which people fought to make our lives better. Music's provided the soundtrack for human rights movements around the world. As we all experienced during the pandemic, there was a strong move to the arts for consolation, for comfort, for entertaining, and for reimagining the future. I did it. I'm sure you did too. But it was a really hard time for artists. It was a hard time for me. The pandemic really forced us to put live shows on hold, quite rightly. Because many of our livelihoods depended on the gathering of people and the magic of this shared space, which is what I missed the most. And for many artists, this lack of touring really shone a light on the importance of intellectual property and that copyright framework that protects us and creates this functioning marketplace for our work. So I'm proud of my musical contributions as a side musician to over 100 albums. I'm glad that the neighboring rights cover these contributions, pay my mortgage. I'm proud of the songs that I've written and registered, my solo albums that I've made. Again, I'm a small business and I employ people and make contributions to the economy. And I rely on the revenue that's derived from my intellectual property. So if it was important then, it's imperative now, to paraphrase Dolly, take care of your IP and it will take care of you.
Thank you so much. Any panel that brings up Dolly Parton is sure to be a great panel. So very excited to get started with the Q&A part of our panel today. We have our first audience question. Could you all talk a little bit more about the other types of IP, such as trademarks and copyrights, that play into innovation, since innovation isn't strictly just patents? And Greta, I was wondering if we could start with you on that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think I mentioned this early on. I mean, I think the largest part of IP for us is the patents, just in that is really where our true technology is represented. However, copyrights and trademarks, I think, are important. It's something that we've been investing in recently and in discussion with our IP council a lot recently. So we have we've made steps to protect our product name. And I think this is important when we think about licensing opportunities specifically, right? If we're ever going to let our technology be represented by another company, it needs to be mentioning this copyrighted or trademarked name. So it's a way that, for us, how we see it, as a way to protect kind of a concept or a way to describe things. And in a lot of ways that if we're giving people vocabulary with which to describe things, like potentially the flow path of your tampon, that's something that we are also looking to protect, so that it's not like you see our spiral tampon and then 10 more that say very, very similar descriptors. So it's a way for us to protect that and think about that global opportunity. So if we're looking for partnership, it's something that we can tie in there to make sure that our company and our actual technology is being used and represented how we would like it to be.
Absolutely. And Miranda, I was wondering if we could follow up with you as well, especially given all the different kinds of innovation in the music industry. I guess just wondering what your perspectives on innovation here might look like.
I'm always fascinated by seeing what artists are coming up with as far as, even just their personalities, artistic work that they create. Obviously, as different platforms emerge as well, NFTs, and then also, with featuring a lot of different genres, also have sort of nods to other artists or feature other artists, and how that's also protected as well. I think that's always fascinating because, again, artists have always been innovators, but and not always known how to capitalize necessarily on their own work and their own products. But I'm sort of just in awe and standing back and watching, I would say. But it is amazing what's happening now in this space as things develop, and of course as people try to find other ways to be paid for their work. So it's interesting to watch kind of what's happening in the meta space, what's happening in the NFT space.
Absolutely, yeah. It seems like there's just so much going on with innovation in the arts and in the pharmaceutical industry and medical care industry. So it's very exciting to watch. Kelly, I was wondering, what challenges would y'all have faced, especially in global health, I guess, without IP rights and without the innovation enabled by IP rights?
That's a great question. Thanks, Morgan. I think ultimately what IP does is it helps assign ownership to an idea and then creates a mechanism for that idea to have value. And we see that through patents, through copyrights, through trademarks. The innovative companies that we represent are facing challenges all over the world. I mentioned a little bit in my remarks. We've seen things like the WTO TRIPS waiver, which we think is going to undermine the environment for life sciences innovation by waiving part of the IP protections included in a global treaty. We see it as through things like what Miranda mentioned, that artists aren't being fairly remunerated for their creative works. I know that's been an issue in Canada. We've also focused on it a bit in European countries. We certainly see challenges with trademark protection as well. GIPC represents a number of the world's leading brands. My boss was actually just testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee on this issue last week. But things like trademarks help consumers to know that the product that they're buying is authentic, and prevents them from purchasing dangerous counterfeit goods. So there's really an array of challenges that come up when it comes to intellectual property, and we see them both in the U.S. and in markets around the world.
Absolutely. And speaking of around the world, how do changing political climates affect IP rights and the development of IP in the years to come? Do you expect that there will be any kind of new challenges brought on within the next few years?
I think, we've seen that the challenges are plenty right now. I referenced the index in my remarks. It's a report that we've done for the last 11 years. Pretty much every year until now, we had seen an increase in the overall country scores. This was the first year where I think about half of the economies that we included, other scores remained unchanged. And part of that is that there is some political stagnation in trying to push new and effective IP policies forward. In terms of how different kind of political regimes impact IP, I think Brazil might provide an interesting example. The Lula administration is back. They previously served a number of years ago and had some troubling IP policies that we had seen in their first go at leading the country. And so, it's a market that we're going to be watching closely. I think we had seen some progress in recent years in Brazil, things like addressing the patent and trademark backlog, and they have a pretty fabulous, actually, copyright enforcement efforts there to try to tackle piracy. And we're worried that work is going to stagnate under the new administration. So it's always a challenge when you're working in global economies that, these are things that you have to keep tabs on, and then kind of adjust your advocacy accordingly.
Absolutely. And Grant, I was wondering if we could follow up with you. How has the political climate perhaps affected your entrepreneurial endeavors with the menstrual care industry?
Do you mean globally or just in general in the US as well?
Abroad in the United States, generally, however, whatever political climate it most affects sequel.
Yeah, I mean, for the US, I think we're very grateful for how the patent system works, and IP in general. I know Kelly mentioned in other countries they're not sometimes as generous to inventors, or you really just have to be aware of how they work. So I think we're also very grateful to have a good counsel that we really trust to also keep tabs on those things. I think globally we do really have to be aware of, first of all, enforcement and different policies country to country, since we do manufacture and want to have the ability to distribute globally as well. So it's something that we are always keeping tabs on and being aware of. There are definitely countries that we have learned about that is essentially it's not really worth filing there, and so you really just try to not engage and not put yourself at risk for any reason. But I think that is something that we're always aware of, and that can change day to day, right?
Absolutely. So we have another audience question. How can policymakers in developing countries, especially, expand knowledge of the importance of IP, especially for female entrepreneurs? Miranda, I was wondering if you could start with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke a little bit about the pandemic making things really more essential than ever, imperative, exactly. But one of the things about making change is it has to be intentional. And so I think one of the things that happens is sometimes there are, and I'm speaking just from the music sector, but sometimes there are great initiatives that have information, again, this sort of available material for outreach, but then it just can't sit there and then hopefully women will find it. So there has to be intentional partnerships with trusted organizations, I think, that can go into those spaces. And they don't necessarily have to be, music organizations. IP is, it should be, it's a right. And so it's something that actually works with even sort of the UNESCO designations as being part of a sustainable society. So I think trusted organizations and doing those partnerships. WIPO for Creators has been launched, and it's really exciting. It's starting as a platform, which will be a global place where people can come. And also, I think, again, looking for those trusted partnerships around the world so that women, especially entrepreneurs, can find these trusted materials as to how to capitalize on their IP.
Absolutely. Kelly, again, how can policymakers, I guess, in an international sense, in developing countries especially, expand that knowledge as well?
Yeah, it's funny. This is actually one of the things we benchmark in our international IP index. I could talk about that report all day long, but just as a matter of background, so when we first released the report, it included only 25 indicators, and we were primarily measuring advanced forms of IP protection. So we were looking at things like, regulatory data protection, or whether or not countries had exceptions and limitations to copyright. And we used to travel all around the world and present the report. And the feedback that we got in, I think it was Vietnam and Indonesia, or Vietnam and India specifically, was that we weren't giving emerging markets enough credit for the things that they were doing already, right? I think in some of these countries that really are trying to transform their economies to being knowledge-based, they are putting in place things like IP awareness campaigns, or they're trying to, better coordinate who handles IP policy within a government. So they create like an IP authority that, kind of helps herd the cats, if you will, when it comes to IP. And I think the thing that we've seen is that those little changes do matter, right? When you start creating a more educated population through these things like IP awareness campaigns, it can help to advance IP protection over time. So what we ended up doing based on that feedback was going back and adding a series of indicators that look at, again, those more ground level protections, IP awareness campaigns being one of them. And I think the thing that's interesting is some surprising countries do really well in those indicators, like India, I think way outperforms all of its other, developing economy counterparts when it comes to that, because there have been efforts to try to advance, knowledge about IP and why it's important. So I think pretty much every chance we get when we're talking to governments, we say, if, you're looking to do something simple, if you're looking for somewhere to start on IP, just talking about why it's important through these awareness campaigns is a great way to do it.
Absolutely. And just to, I guess, expand on that, what does India's efforts in this regard look like, and how, I guess, can other countries kind of implement their own as they get started, besides after kind of raising awareness about IP?
Yeah, I think, there's been lots of different efforts. I think some of them have been campaigns that are sponsored by the government to create awareness about IP rights. We've also seen the power of public-private partnership, where, the associations that we work with on the ground will partner with the government to put out messages. Universities can be a really powerful voice in this regard to help promote greater awareness. So you can really kind of pick and choose any number of tactics, but I think really the bottom line is that just trying to create as much awareness about it as possible through whatever vehicles we can be really powerful.
Absolutely. And also, herding cats, I think, is one of the best sayings I have ever heard. Just to bring that up. Hell of a saying. So we have another audience question. Greta and Miranda, y'all mentioned licensing. Could y'all explain a little bit more about how that works and why IP matters in those endeavors in your fields? Greta, I don't know if you want to take the first shot at that.
Yeah, for sure. So licensing for our field, essentially it would mean if you're a small company or a big company, it does not matter. But if you have some sort of proprietary technology, for us, the licensing opportunity looks like, okay, if we don't necessarily want to be the brand to commercialize that, we want our technology to be commercialized by someone else. For us, it looks most attractive in other countries. So if we own a brand in the US market, we don't necessarily want to license to someone in a competing market. But if we would potentially have a later commercialization strategy for somewhere in Europe or around the world, we could look at licensing as an option to get into that without having to spend a lot of upfront money on marketing or any other research that you would need to enter the market. So it would look like us going to a company that was ready to commercialize and saying, you can use our technology, but having some sort of an agreement. So a lot of times it comes in the form of profit sharing or just agreement on a price that we would be awarded per sale, something like that, with the agreement of potentially, and I think it was a great point that Kelly brought up, that the trademarks and licensing opportunities can actually empower consumers to know this is an authentic product. So we could say, you could use our technology for X price, or you could use our technology, but you have to do these three things. And a licensing agreement makes sure that that's all agreed upon by both parties, and it also protects us from just anyone using it. It's basically saying they agree to use it, but it's not like they're distributing it to everyone. It's not like they are sharing our proprietary technology as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, my colleagues have done a lot of work with counterfeits as of late, and it seems like it's just so important to be able to have that kind of appropriate usage. Miranda, you also mentioned a bit about licensing. Can you explain more about how that works and why IP matters in your endeavors?
Yeah. So songs, once you write them and then record them, so each recording as well, they become a bundle of rights. So it's not just one particular copyright there, it's a whole bundle. My organization, Music Canada, we did a study a number of years ago with artist entrepreneurs. And the biggest gap that we found, the biggest knowledge gap, was actually understanding what the bundle of rights even was. So what artists even had in their toolkit that they then could go a license, and where all of those licenses ended up being negotiated. So one of the things that we did was we created these videos that explain exactly the anatomy of a song and how each of those pieces in the bundle of rights can be monetized, and how and where to go to do that. So you can find that on the Connect Music licensing page. There's a resource page that has all of these things, and even sort of a choose your own adventure flow chart where you go down and are you an independent artist? Do you own your own rights? Do you have a publisher, et cetera, et cetera? So you can go and find out all of those things. Because obviously, number one is education, making sure that people understand what they have and how they can register and sign up for accessing all of those parts of the bundles of rights. And then on the other side, there are so many uses for music, again, and we advocate for creators to be paid when their music is played. So that means that there are organizations that collect money for when gyms use music, and what music are they using, their blanket licensing. And then it gets more specific. So say, I mean, do you remember early days of Grey's Anatomy? There would be this song that came on and everybody would cry, and you would want to find that song, when the music supervisor picks that music, they have to then clear it on both sides, the publishing side and then and the song side. So they actually have to do a lot of due diligence and make sure that that song is then cleared, and then the artist is paid, publisher is paid, whoever their teams that they've negotiated to work with. So there are so many. I mean, you'll think about it every time you walk through a mall. You turn on your Pandora, whatever you're listening to. There are always ways that those hopefully those songs are getting back to the creator, the remuneration for the playing of those songs.
Absolutely, yeah. Giving credit where credit is due is vitally important. We have about 10 minutes left in our event today, so just want to encourage everyone to make sure that you send your questions on in to the Slido, so that way we can make sure that we cover every topic that y'all want to hear about. So we have another audience question. There's a concern about lack of investment in rare diseases and innovation for issues affecting small groups. Do you think IP is a barrier or an enabler here? And Kelly, I don't know if you want to take the first shot at that one.
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned in my remarks that I have 2 autoimmune diseases. The second one I have is quite rare. It's something called dermatomyositis. I think it affects less than 1 in 200,000 people. So rare disease is something that's close to my heart. I think IP is certainly an enabler here, right? You need to create some kind of a framework that's going to provide companies with a motive to investigate what treatments might be available to patients like me, right? When there's a really small commercial market, there needs to be some system of incentives in order to get companies to invest. And IP is one of the tools that governments can use. It's an interesting question today specifically because the EU, as I mentioned, recently, just today actually, released some changes to the pharmaceutical framework. And one of the things that they're doing is changing the incentive for investment into orphan diseases. I think one of the things that governments can do is they add additional exclusivity. So they say to a company, okay, if you invest in a treatment for, a rare or orphan disease, you can get, it's like additional 6 months to a year of exclusivity. And that provides that incentive for companies to invest even when the commercial market is small. So I think IP is critical to making that investment into innovation for rare disease possible.
Absolutely. And Greta, it seems like there's been a lack of investment in the menstrual care industry as well within the past few decades. Certainly not as much attention as perhaps other healthcare products receive. Do you think that IP is also a barrier or an enabler in that industry?
Yeah, I think it's a barrier in that it makes it more expensive to protect yourself once you do something. But I think, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think the real barriers are cost of manufacturing, then also that it's regulated by the FDA, specifically for tampons, not for all menstrual products like pads are not class 2 anyway. But I think it is once you're at that point where you have some sort of idea and you know how to produce it then it becomes obviously an incentive, because you can then defend that innovation. So I don't think the IP itself is the barrier, but it does add a little bit of that upfront cost of, okay, before we have revenue, likely we will need to invest in IP, and that's just a reality. But I think the real costs are not from IP. So it's mostly an incentive once you're already past the other thresholds like manufacturing, and regulatory.
And Morgan, I might just add that this kind of narrative about IP being a barrier is one that has been incredibly prevalent during the global pandemic. I mentioned the WTO TRIPS waiver efforts earlier. There's a group of countries that want to waive IP protections under the TRIPS agreement for, right now it's already been waived for vaccines, so looking to do it for therapeutics and diagnostics. But the motivation behind these developing countries is that they're saying that, IP is a barrier to them getting these therapeutics and diagnostics in a timely manner. To that we say, IP is what enabled the investment into them, and you need to look at all of the, other barriers that exist. Earlier in the pandemic when we were shipping vaccines all around the world, there were barriers to storing them, right? Because some of them needed to be stored at ultra cold technologies. There are barriers in healthcare infrastructure, or regulatory approvals. There's trade-related barriers like export controls. So I think, that there's certainly a narrative out there that IP can be a barrier in some ways, and it's always worth digging down like one more level and having a conversation about what can be preventing access in some of these circumstances. So that's been a big part of what we've been trying to do over the last 3 years.
Absolutely. Miranda, it also seems like there's a narrative as well that in the music industry. Is that something that you've experienced in recent years?
Well, living through the digital disruption in the 2000s and Napster, when the value of music really dissipated to such a degree where people thought that they could just steal music, that was a really difficult thing to kind of come back from because, as both Greta and Kelly said, you need to have value in something to have investment in something. And so what we've seen now is the growth, which is great, and we're definitely growing as an industry again, which is wonderful. There are pros and cons to streaming services, but anybody around the world can have every song in the whole world on your phone, which is kind of amazing. And we just didn't have that before, and we didn't have sort of the long life of a music catalog. So before my album came out, people could buy it, then it would disappear from stores, but now it's there forever. We saw Kate Bush Running Up the Hill become a #1 hit again because of the TV show. So there is this longevity, and so that is creating value. But definitely, it was very hard to go up against that idea that songs were kind of valueless because they could be stolen. So I'm hopeful as an optimist, I guess, heading into AI that we can still maintain the value of the song and the value of the human creator.
Absolutely. Humans are essential to just about everything, but music especially. So we have just a couple more minutes here. So just want to close it out with how do you view your IP and IP strategy changing over the coming years, if it will at all? And Greta, I don't know if you want to take that one first.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have more patent filing. So I don't think our strategy in general is going to change, but I think we're going to be potentially litigating and having to defend those patents rather than right now we're kind of on just more aggressive filing and we're in R&D currently. So I think we're gonna see that mental shift of going to be we're on market, we're up against a lot more scrutiny. And we're having to really defend those and also enforce things like trademark and negotiate things like licensing agreements and see those not just on paper but in the real world and have to assess what we like and don't like about them.
Absolutely. Miranda, do you view your strategy type changing within the next few years?
Well, it was interesting to watch all my colleagues. I mean, it was devastating for so many colleagues through the pandemic when touring stopped, because that had been where a lot of people put all their eggs in one basket. And that was where they were making, an income, whether it's meager or not. But one of the things I think that myself and a lot of my colleagues got out of touring stopping is, okay, income needs to be portfolioed. So we have to think about IP as, and again, like copyright and all of our songs, whether that is neighboring rights. So I'm a session musician, making sure I do that, making sure I can access money when I play live, obviously, but also what other things can I get into in that make sense with my brand, quote unquote, but also that can lead to income streams, so that if one dries up, it's not the end of the world. This is something that there are other options and there are other roads. So I think everybody really had this idea of, okay, we cannot just have one anymore. We really have to think about other options. And I think really strong IP, making sure that your work is protected, was one of the things that everyone really turned to.
Yeah, Morgan, I would just add, going back to what Miranda said earlier about the digital disruption. I think, when streaming entered the scene, music companies had to reinvent their whole business model in order to keep up, and the IP had to change accordingly, right? Intellectual property is constantly trying to keep pace with whatever new technology comes to market. So I think the big change that we see coming down the pike is AI. So I know GIPC is going to be very focused on the coming weeks and months to make sure that that human-generated content of creators and innovators is adequately protected.
Absolutely. It's big things happening on that front. So very, very glad that all y'all are on the case. We are unfortunately out of time today, but thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for your insights. This was a great celebration of World IP Day, and we appreciate y'all coming and taking the time.